It's a great honor to be here, and I will begin with a confession. I traveled to Korea to be with the Dean and China to be with him, and this is the third time, and people are talking, and I think that's very nice. And Doris, what a great honor to be with you today when we celebrate Peter Drucker's 100th birthday, and everyone in this room has our own stories, our own memories of Peter Drucker, and all of us are better for having known Peter, his works. And some of us have little tattoos on our shoulders, invisible ink, however, but one says, think first, speak last. What is the other one? Ask, don't tell. We all have the wisdom of Peter Drucker, and always there are a few messages that seemed to be just for us, and we carry them with me wherever we go. My journey with Peter Drucker began long ago in the mountains of western Pennsylvania, when in 1970, I found myself the CEO of a small local Girl Scout council. I never wanted a professional job. I had been a Girl Scout volunteer locally, nationally, traveled all over the world, an international volunteer, never wanted a professional job. One day, I found myself the CEO of this Tallis Rock Girl Scout Council, and I agreed I would take it for 6 months until we got the finances straightened out. Then they would find a real leader. A month later, I knew it was the great adventure, but I walked in that first day, and under my arm were copies of the effective executive for every single Girl Scout staff member. Now, I really didn't know who Peter Drucker was, never expected to even see him. But I just knew his philosophy, his works, exactly right for this small Girl Scout council in the mountains of western Pennsylvania. And he had been, I thought, the greatest authority, the greatest thought leader of our times. And so in all my volunteer work, we had all of his books, all of his tapes, and his philosophy gave us the courage to launch a quiet revolution in western Pennsylvania. We threw out the old hierarchy, and we developed wonderful circular, flexible fluid management system, and Peter Drucker was with us. 6 years later, I found myself in New York City. I'm the new CEO of Girl Scouts of the USA, the largest organization for girls and women in the world. And of course, Peter Drucker was part of that very famous 5-year transformation of this largest organization for girls and women in the world. And everyone had his works. We would quote Peter Drucker. No one ever expected to see this giant, it's a great intellectual giant. So I had been there 5 years, and I received an invitation from John Bradamus, the Chancellor of New York University, who said, the invitation said, please come to the University Club at 5:30 to hear Peter Drucker. And there would be 50 guests. Everyone was president of a foundation or a large organization. Well, I knew I would never see Peter, meet him actually in a crowd of 50. but I would actually hear him beyond his videotapes. If you grow up in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and your invitation says 5:30, when do you get there? I walk in promptly at 5:30, and I am alone with two bartenders. I turn around, and there's a man behind me, and he said, "I am Peter Drucker." I am so stunned I forget my manners, and instead of saying, "Oh, how do you do?" I blurted out, "Do you realize how important you are to the Girl Scouts?" And he said, "No, tell me." So I said, "You go to any one of our 335 Girl Scout councils, you will see every book you've ever written. If you look at our national planning, management, corporate management materials, you will find your philosophy flows right through it." He said, "You are very daring. I would be afraid to do that. Tell me, does it work?" I said, "It works so superbly that after 5 years, these remarkable people, 688,000 men and women serving 2.25 million girls, they have transformed the organization, and I would like to come to Claremont, ask you for 1 hour of your time, and lay out before you everything you say the effective organization must have in place, and we do, and I would like you to help me understand, advise me on how we can take the lead in this society and just lead right into the future." He said, "Why should both of us travel? I will be in New York." He gave me the date. "I will give you a day of my time." Just then, John Bradamus, the chancellor, and his entourage came in apologizing and swept Peter Drucker away, and I looked at my watch and I said, "In 4.5 minutes, I have met Peter Drucker and I have an hour of his time." I felt like the greatest heiress of all time. The great day came, and I knew I couldn't keep him to myself as much as I would like to. The National Board, 100 members of the national staff were in the boardroom. Peter arrived, of course, very promptly, and I tried not to be too effusive as I introduced him, but I introduced Peter Drucker. He stood there, thanked us for permitting him to be there. Then instead of saying, as I'm sure some of our people thought he would say, "You're remarkable, what you have done," etc., he looked at them and said, "You do not see yourselves life-size. You do not understand, appreciate the significance of the work you do, for we live in a society that pretends to care about its children, and it does not." Well, I wanted to rise and say, "Oh, yes, it does," but I couldn't think of anything to say. And Peter Drucker said, "For a little while, you give a girl a chance to be a girl in a society that forces her to grow up all too soon." And that was 1981. That was the prescience of Peter Drucker. 2 years before he died, I called Peter, and I was writing an article on children at risk. And I said, "Peter, in 1981, you said we live in a society that pretends to care about its children, and it does not. Do you still feel the same way?" There was a long, long silence, and then a very sad voice. And Peter Drucker said, "Frances, has anything changed?" we all know what is happening to our children in this society that pretends to care about them and does not. But no one else was talking this way in 1981. When I left Girl Scouts of the USA, I was there 13 years, that's about 5,000 days, and I never had a bad day in my whole life, those 5,000 days. And I bought a house, a place in Easton, Pennsylvania, because after all, I am a Pennsylvanian. Promised Doubleday I would write a book on mission, and I wasn't going to travel. 6 weeks later, 2 other Drucker disciples, Bob Buford, you all know, and Dick Schubert, who had been CEO of American Red Cross, we were somewhere and we were all bemoaning that somehow every voluntary organization in this country did not understand, appreciate, use Peter Drucker's philosophy. And so we got this bright idea. Why don't we fly to Claremont? Stay at Griswold's Inn, beautiful Griswold's. All afternoon and evening, we will brainstorm. How can we bring Peter Drucker to the total social sector? And then in the morning, we would have Peter join us for breakfast, and we would deliver our brainchild. We thought that was a great idea, so we flew out, and we had a little room, and by 10 o'clock at night, it was filled with newsprint, and there was our new baby, and it was called the Peter Drucker Foundation for Nonprofit Management. And we would move Peter around the country to every sector. Well, Peter arrived the next morning at 8:30. As he walked in, he had this very suspicious look that communicated, "What are you 3 rascals doing here? I know you're up to no good." So the 3 of us, the newsprint all over the wall, we thought it was very powerful. And so we took turns dancing around the room presenting the new foundation. Peter kept his head down like this. We couldn't tell what he was thinking. Finally, when we finished, he looked up and said, "Number 1, we will not name it for me. I am not dead yet, and I do not intend to be an icon." Now that was one of the 2, probably twice in his life, he ever lost a battle. He lost that one. Number 2, already he looked at that stuff. He expanded our vision. He said, "We're not going to focus on me. There are a lot of good people out there, and we will bring them all in." And we knew he had bought it. And number 3, Bob had said, "Frances has just left the Girl Scouts 6 weeks ago. We think she should be chairman of the board." And I had said, yes, I could have time for 3 board meetings a year. So he looked at me and said in a very tough voice, "You will not be the chairman. You will be the president and CEO and run it, or it won't work." So 6 weeks after leaving the largest organization for girls and women in the whole world, suddenly I am the new president of the smallest foundation in the world with no money, no staff, but this powerful, powerful vision. Now, for the next 12 years, think of the incredible gift this is. For the next 12 years, 3 times a year, Peter attended every board meeting as the honorary chairman. We had some of the best conferences in the world. Peter spoke at every conference. And he was right about bring them all in. Today we have over 400 great thought leaders. Some of them are in this room who write for us, speak for us. We've just published recently our 27th book, The Organization of the Future, and it's our 27th, and we are in 30 countries. Now, that was Peter Drucker's vision. We had this nice little vision, and Peter made it global. And to this day, when I think of that day in Griswold's Inn, the three of us think it was one of the most treasured days of our life. And there's something about Peter's ability to sit in a room, as he did at our board meetings. He would sit in that room, and everybody would be talking. Finally, Peter would speak. In 3 sentences, he would distill the wisdom, the direction, and not one of us will ever forget. Bill Pollard and several of the people you know were part of those remarkable early years. When Peter wrote, we would see the reunification of Germany when no one else said that. And at one point, Henry Kissinger said, "What, the Berlin Wall coming down? I think Peter is going gaga." And then the day came, the wall went down, the reunification took place, and then people would say, "Peter, how could you predict that?" And Peter Drucker would say, "I never predict. I simply look out the window and I see what is visible but not yet seen." Every speech I make, it doesn't matter which sector, every speech I make, at some point, I talk about how Peter is saying to us, look out the window, see what is visible and not yet seen. Then you can design the program, and when it emerges, you're ready for it. There's something about Peter's voice. Ira told us about Harvard Business School, 1989, what business can learn from nonprofits, and what? Peter said, our Drucker Foundation the greatest challenge was to redefine the social sector as the equal partner of business and government. Now think about that. That was 1990. In 2000, Peter Drucker said, we have done it. We have redefined the social sector. And some people say this was Peter Drucker's, one of his greatest contributions. And he would say in a very sober voice, it is not business, it is not government, it is the social sector that may yet save the society. He was not a pessimist, but he was very sober about this decade just about to end. I hope all of you have the new issue of Harvard Business Review, the Drucker Centennial, What Would Business Do? 5 disciples were asked to write a little essay, a very short one, on what I learned from Peter Drucker. And thus I chose The Social Sector Redefined. I think you have copies, as I thought that was the most important thing I would write about. A.G. Lafley, Peter Puschek, Oscar Motomura, and Zhang Rumin. There are 5 of us, and each one is very different. You couldn't find 5 articles more different, and yet all of us heard this is what we heard from Peter Drucker. And so he forced us to see ourselves life-size. And all of us carry with us messages from Peter Drucker. And I remember one, he had a way of using language the way no one else uses language. And I'll close my remarks so we can have a dialogue. I was going to say goodbye to the 335 local council CEOs and 100-something national staff members. And it was our last, we had an annual adventure in excellence where Warren Bennis and Peter, great thought leaders, would come and join us. Well, to say goodbye, Warren was there and Peter Drucker, and the last on the program, there was a dialogue, Peter Drucker and Francis Hesselbein. Well, I didn't worry so much about it because, as you know, if you say something, then Peter Drucker hears you and then adds to it, and you start sounding intelligent. So I thought, oh, I'll be sitting with Peter, and he will carry the evening. We sat down, and Peter Drucker, and this is the last time I would be with these 500 people, remarkable executives who had shared the 13-year journey. And Peter looks at me and says, "We are playing a trick on you. We have fooled you." He said, "Instead of a dialogue, I am interviewing you." Now, how would you like to be interviewed by Peter Drucker? And I thought, I think I'll die. And then I thought, no, it wouldn't be appropriate. So it went well because he would ask me a question, I would respond, and then he would say, "Now what you're saying is," it was just the most illuminating, marvelous. 40 minutes. Finally, the last question, and I want you to think, how would you reply to Peter Drucker? He said, "Now, Francis, you'll be leaving. They're going to hang your portrait on the wall. There will be a little brass plaque under your portrait. What do you think it will say of you?" Well, had you ever thought of such a thing? I looked at him and I heard myself saying, "I hope it will say, she never broke a promise." He said, "No, it will say, she kept the faith." And no one had ever heard that phrase before. We took it, and we find that people, you say, "We keep the faith," people translate that on their own terms, into their own lives. So in June, I was part of a small group, including my friend here, of Drucker disciples, colleagues, fellow travelers, and we were in Korea celebrating Peter Drucker's centennial. And I even planted a tree in the Peter Drucker, Doris Drucker forest that this wonderful corporation has. And Xiaoming, as Iris said, 3 cities in China, Hong Kong, speeches, media events every day, all about Peter Drucker, the reverence they have in Asia for Peter Drucker, and how when you talk about him, suddenly you are all family. We're going to talk a lot about Peter Drucker's legacy. Last Tuesday, I was at West Point. There was a reception celebrating my appointment to the chair for the study of leadership. It will be 2 years. And I asked our publisher, could he have something we could put in a little gift bag? Now, what are the odds that I am at West Point? And of course, I'm quoting Peter Drucker. The book in the book bag happens to be our friend Bill Cohen's book, Drucker on Leadership. And at the top is a quote from someone who wrote the preface named Francis Hesselbein. How could that happen? People, I apologize, sir. I will not do that again. So every 6 weeks, I will be going back to West Point. Instead of lecturing every 6 weeks to cadets for 2 years, each time I will take a great thought leader, Jim Collins, Bill Cohen, people who carry the Drucker message in everything they do. So for 2 years, even though his name is not on a plaque or a banner, you can be very sure that all of us who have been so deeply affected by Peter Drucker in our lives, our work, our character, we will be carrying Peter Drucker to West Point, and I can assure you we will keep the faith.